This is 9/11 Free Fall.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of 9/11 Free Fall. My name is Andy Steele, and I am the host. Tonight, we're joined by 9/11 family members Bob McIlvaine and Barbara Krukowski-Rastelli. They'll be talking about their role in the FBI lawsuit, and the conversation actually expands into them sharing their views on the cover-up of this issue, 9/11, and the institutions that oversee that cover-up. It gives a real good glimpse into what the family members have been going through all these years trying to get justice for their loved ones. You're going to want to hear it. It's coming your way in just a moment.
The views expressed on this show by guests and the host on issues outside of the 9/11 controlled demolition evidence are the opinions of those individuals alone and do not necessarily reflect those of architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth.
Today we are joined by a mother and a father whose lives were forever changed by the September 11th attacks. Both will be plaintiffs, along with AE911Truth, on the lawsuit being filed against the FBI by the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry. We spoke about that last week, and we'll probably be hearing a lot more about that in the coming months and year. Today we have Bob McIlvaine. He's the father of Bobby McIlvaine, who was killed at the North Tower on September 11th. Bob's been an outspoken advocate for a new investigation into the September 11th attacks for a number of years. His son Bobby is whom we named the Bobby McIlvaine Act after, and that remains to be draft legislation for a new investigation. It's just waiting for some member of Congress to introduce it. And we're continuing on those efforts. And it's always a pleasure to have Bob on. So, Bob, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Andy.
And today we're joined for the first time by Barbara Krukowski-Rastelli. She's the mother of firefighter William E. Krukowski, who was murdered on September 11th in the World Trade Center attack. We'll be learning more about William and hearing Barbara's story today. So, Barbara, thank you for coming on this show.
You're welcome.
So, we're going to start with Bob. And, Bob, you're well known to our supporters, and so is Bobby. And your efforts have been heroic, in my view. Again, we named the draft legislation after him. We constantly reach out to Congress with it to do their job and really thoroughly investigate this important event. But there are always new listeners coming on, and who knows, maybe members of the FBI are curious since they're being sued and listening to this podcast. So please remind our audience who Bobby was and what happened to your family on September 11th.
Well, Bobby was 26 years old. He had just got a job at Merrill Lynch. I guess he was working there 2 to 3 weeks. He lived up in 96 and First. And Bobby, well, he wanted to be a writer. He's a tremendous writer. He was a Princeton grad, English major, and so he loved writing. Actually, he really wanted to write books, but of course he just moved up to New York, so he had to make money somehow, some way. So, but anyway, on that morning, he traveled down by the subway got off at Fulton Street. And of course, this took me a long time to figure out exactly what happened. But my story is, and I think he was walking. I know he was walking into the towers, and I think before the planes hit. And there is a lot of proof out there that there are big explosions in the lobby. So I think he was looking in the lobby, and by the nature of his injuries, it was like a big bomb just almost blew him up, knocked him back, and so he was killed instantly. And but I never, of course, at that time we didn't know what happened. They had a meeting up on the 106th floor. I think the 106th floor. So we thought he was up there, but we did take his body home that week. We found him. We found out Wednesday he was in the morgue, and Thursday we went over to the morgue and claimed him, and they brought him home Monday, and I think we buried him on Tuesday, the following week. So a week after we buried him. So believe it or not, we're one of the lucky ones that actually had a chance to bury him. And they actually did an autopsy on him, to look at exactly what happened to him. And from that autopsy, I was able to surmise that he was hit from a powerful detonation walking into the lobby. And so that's what I base everything on. And I do that because I've dealt with so many 9/11 family members, and this is my story. Whatever they can say, but I hate arguing with 9/11 family members or debating with 9/11 family members of what's happened, because I've been on a lot of shows over the years, and to me, and I've been saying it for the last quite a few years now, that being the fact that he died before the planes hit, then I'd rather say that Muslims had absolutely nothing to do with his death, because someone put bombs in there. And unless the government can prove that Muslims put bombs throughout the buildings, then my son's death has not been investigated. So that's where I stand on that right now, and that's everything I've been doing. And it makes it a lot easier for you, because I'm just talking about Bobby. I'm not talking about anyone else. I don't want to get in arguments with people, but this is my story, and I base everything on the autopsy. At first I didn't really understand what happened. It's taken me a long time to really delve into this, and because it was just too tough to talk about his death. But that's why I used to do a lot of piecework instead of doing this. So basically that's a quick story.
And I think it's a sad continuing tragedy of September 11th that obviously you have what happened on that day and the lives lost, like Bobby and William, but also, too, all this division that's been created between people who would have otherwise gotten along had this thing never even happened, where people believe the official story, they don't. It's obvious that we can't just put it aside and let it go. This is way too important, and justice needs to be served, but this continues now. And, of course, all the other things, the people who got sick down there, Ground Zero, for them 9/11 is still happening, and it's just like this event continues to resonate even here 20 years, it's 18 years, I'm rounding up, but it's so long after the event took place. And Barbara, I want to hear about William, and I want to hear your 9/11 story too, but I always think about not just the final days of the people who died that day, but also the lives lived beforehand. So please start off telling us about who William was, the life he lived before September 11th, and then tell us your 9/11 story.
Okay, let me see where to start. He was my only son. He was a treasure. Never did I have one moment of angst from him. In all my life, he was my heart. I have one other child, Virginia. She's the only one I have left now. Billy had a son, which we called Little Bill, and he was 10 years old at the time of his murder, of his father's murder. And he was a fireman who he absolutely loved his job because he thought he could do something of service, which was quite frankly just his way. He always was helping people. He loved his son. He loved his son's friends. He loved his dog, which was a Rottweiler. In fact, he made a wagon and took the kids around the corner with the Rottweiler pulling the wagon. He did selfless things. He did things for others. And to lose him is, to this day, something I live with every day. I think of him every day, as I'm sure most 9/11 families do. And I miss him terribly. Let's see. He took his bike to go to his job in Hell's Kitchen in New York because he lived in Bayside, which was a really far away, but he rode his bike always into work because he was a health nut. He was also called a super probie. He was out of probation probably a couple or maybe a month or so when he died. And I think he was actually on his way home on 9/11, and they called him back, and he came right back and went right down to the site. And knowing Bill, he was one of the first ones up the stairs. I can figure that out for sure. He had many interests. He used to fix cars. Anyone in the neighborhood knew that's what he did. And he'd fix your car if you needed it. So that was him. I don't know how in-depth you want me to get with these comments, but he was a giver. He wasn't a taker. He gave of himself. Now, 9/11, like I said, I think he was just called down there. He was married but separated from his wife at the time. She believed he was in the donut store. I remember her saying that, and I just said no. In my own heart of hearts, I knew he was gone. I just knew it because when I saw the explosion of Tower 1 by the plane, I was in a drugstore, and they had a little TV there, and I saw it, and I knew something, that was it. And my daughter says, "Mom, how could you think like that?" And I said, "I pray it isn't." But I just was very close to him, so I knew, that he was gone. And she and I immediately got in the car, and we drove up to New York as best we could, stayed with my brother who lived in New Jersey. I was unable to get into Manhattan at all. The interesting fact was that I was in Hackensack, New Jersey, I think it's called that, at a park that you could then see the smoke coming up from what was the wreck of the World Trade Center. And in the sky there was to me, and I said to my daughter, "Look at that, it's in the shape of a bird with its wings around where the building was." Big cloud of smoke that looked like that. And I said, "He's gone, and that is. I did get to the site a couple of days or a week or so later with the chaplain from the fire department, and when I saw the devastation, I could not believe it. And then after that, we had a ceremony for him at our local church, St. Joseph Acts in Bayside, and it was filled with Mayor Giuliani and representatives from the governor and firefighters and neighbors and friends and relatives. It was really an awesome send-off. The only trouble is I never got a piece or any evidence of any remains. Maybe my ex-daughter-in-law now has them, but she's cut off communication with me. So all I can hope is that there's something. If there isn't, then so there isn't. You come to terms with all this stuff eventually. And I know my daughter, I'm sorry, I'm having trouble. My daughter and I miss him because of the person that he was. And he could have been. And when I saw the evidence from the pre-fall 9/11 or the architects and engineers, I was convinced, because I had seen many explosions of buildings, and they fell just like the World Trade Center. And I kept saying, this can't be. This is an enormous building. It should have maybe fallen to the side where the plane hit it or something like that. So that's the worst part. I want to know how my son died. And if this is a plot, whoever plotted it is, God, it's terrible if our country lets this go. I don't know what else to say.
No, I think you said it all, and we're doing our best, certainly, to not let it go, to keep this push for justice continuing throughout as many decades as it will take for them to acknowledge what is obvious, what is right in front of them. And the reason we're all coming together today is because this lawsuit has been filed. Barbara will be added to it very shortly here. It'll be amended. Right now it's Bob and Architects and Engineers for 911Truth. But this is the kind of action that a lot of people who have supported us for a number of years have been waiting for. So, Bob, I just want to hear it from you, speaking only for yourself, not for AE or the truth community, for you. Why this lawsuit? Why now?
Well, why now? It's about time. But as Barbara said, my son was murdered, all right? Now, I've gone through a long process. You know, I was in the peace movement. I went to all the 9/11 Commission hearings, and it was a sham. It wasn't Max Cleland called it a sham. The whole thing was a sham. And since that day, I gave up the peace, and I just worked on finding out how my son died and who murdered him. And that's all I do. So it's been a long process, and I could die tomorrow, and I feel comfortable that I know exactly what happened. And I don't really care what other people think, and so forth and so on. But I've put my time and effort in, and so the lawsuit. It's amazing how the press has blackballed or blacklisted this. It's just there's not no one said a thing, and the fact that we're not pointing fingers in this litigation. It's just saying the information that is out there that has not been put out by the FBI or the Justice Department of Justice, that this has to be done. And what's great about it is we'll take it to Congress if we have to. And they have to say, all right, what happened on that day? We have the New York Times reporting, 118 people, I don't know if it's the exact amount, reporting bombs going off, explosions going off that morning. And, I've talked to firemen, I've talked to EMTs, I've talked to so many people saying that these bombs are going off. Of course, Willie Rodriguez, I was good friends with Willie, and his story, he was in the basement. And when I started investigating all this, looking into it, it's just the fact that Bobby, a lot of people thought maybe he was up there and he had jumped. But by the nature of his injuries, I finally sat down. It took me until 2007 to call the coroner. I never did talk to the coroner because we had gotten his body, but I guess I didn't have the guts to do it. And it was difficult. But just by the nature of his injuries, I'm certain that he was walking into it. And of course, the timeline, he wouldn't have been at work that early. At 46, he might have been just getting into the towers. He had probably decided Merrill Lynch was across the street. So I don't know if he was going up or he was just cutting through to go to Merrill Lynch across West Street. So it's been a murder investigation for me forever. So the lawsuit is perfect. We're not pointing fingers, or the lawyers are not pointing fingers, but the FBI has all this information. Why don't they release it? Their job was to investigate it. And there's 7 other aspects of it that we want released to the public. Let the public know that and these things haven't been investigated. And how come? Everyone thinks the plane brought them down. Well, what about all the explosions? What did that do? It seems like it brought them down in perfect demolition style, especially Building 7. And, millions of people know this. But the thing is, you don't get it on the press. You don't get it on TV. And, people think, well, that's the story. That's the end of the story. And it's been a big cover-up. And hopefully, if they don't bring this information, the Department of Justice and the FBI, then we're going to take it to Congress. And then we get a national forum there that this has to be investigated. What happened that day? Who blew up those towers? So that's my whole story on it, and I that's why I feel good about it. But then again, the press is ignoring it. But that's okay because, the lawyers can keep moving on it, and eventually, hopefully, we get before Congress if the FBI refuses to put this information out. But here it's a law enforcement agency, and imagine that, the FBI, top law enforcement agency, and they won't release the information they have on what happened on 9/11. That's a disgrace. It's an absolute disgrace.
It's likely the FBI lawyers will be trying their hardest to avoid accountability, as the agency has done, and own up to their own failure to properly look into this mass murder. And for them and other government institutions, to me at least, it seems more about covering their tails and reinforcing the official story, despite what any facts show. And this angers me, and I didn't even, on the day of September 11th, I didn't know anybody that died that day. So for me, obviously, being angered about it, not having that personal connection until I was involved in the 9/11 Truth movement and met folks like you, I can't imagine what it's like for you guys seeing this juxtaposition between the motivations of people at the FBI who are just doing a job and trying to toe the company line and figure out ways to reinforce that company line, and somebody who's actually trying to get justice for their loved one. And we'll start with Bob. I just want you to dig a little deeper, if you can, and let our audience know the personal toil that this takes, having to do battle in the pursuit of proper justice for your son.
Well, the toil is, I in the fall, I got sick, and it just came on like no one's been. I mean, I was really sick. It was like 2 days before I was going to come up to 9/11 and come up to Ground Zero. And, all the things architects and engineers was going to do. And then on the 11th, I don't know if it was anxiety or not, but I mean, I thought I was going to die. I felt so bad. God, it was, I was in ICU, and I couldn't, really, I had all sorts of stuff went wrong with me. And they actually said at the hospital, they started thinking, well, maybe they'd say anxiety that created all this. There's definite physical problems that I had, but so I don't know. I think it's taken its toll on me physically. It really has, and so I'm really working hard to get my health back together, and I feel a lot better. But it's just there's so much anger, and I have to let that go. Like I see the grandkids once a week, so that's a big deal. So I have to step away from this sometimes because it really, my thing is I'm looking for the person who murdered my son. And that's tough. It really is. And then when you're looking at the government, you're looking at what's happening in the world, all these other people being murdered, it just brings about a lot of anxiety. And my wife would love it if I just gave it all up and we start traveling and having fun, but, I just feel guilty doing that. I don't know how. My son has been properly investigated. He's still dead, and I'm supposed to have fun. I don't know. I just don't understand that. So it's difficult balance. The balance act with my wife and myself is very difficult. Not very difficult because she's on board because of architects and engineers. She feels it was a demolition, but she doesn't. Or not a demolition, a controlled demolition. But she just doesn't want to get involved in it. She'd rather just ignore it, and it's tough. It's tough on her also. So, but this was a great opportunity, and she agrees. She supports me going down to Washington and doing what I do, and so I just have to watch myself. I can't do it 24/7. I have to step away from it, and I do that. And I don't have many friends because no one wants to talk about it. And not that if I'm around friends, I never bring it up around people, but if they bring it up. When we go to parties, my wife says, under no circumstance talk about 9/11. And then, of course, people will ask me about it, and, I'll answer them, and she'll get upset that I'm talking about it. So it really it plays its personal toll on you, physically and mentally. So it's a balancing act. So with that anger, you have to parlay that into, doing nice things once in a while. You know what I mean? But it's really tough on me. It really is. And I have a difficult time with it. But, as long as I'm eating right and drinking right and try to stay in shape, I'll keep going. There's no ifs, ands, and buts about it. But I'm just so happy with this lawsuit because we're going after the FBI, and to me, no matter how you look at it, it's a cover-up. I mean, I think you could talk to anyone in the world, and they said, yes, this is a cover-up. If you look at those buildings especially, that of course it looks like bombs were placed in there, explosives were placed in there. Well, to me, if you're covering up a crime of that nature and what's happened after that crime, you're just as guilty as anyone. If the New York Times is covering this up, they're guilty of the crime. If the Philadelphia Inquirer is covering it up, they're guilty too. I mean, that's how I feel anymore. There's a lot of people in this country who are just as guilty of this crime as anyone around the world that might have been involved. So that's what my feeling is.
Now, Barbara, I want to ask you, too, because you are joining this after it was filed. Again, it's going to be amended to include you. But your personal motivations for actually taking charge and becoming part of this lawsuit, not just having questions, not just speaking out about it, but joining the offensive line here in this and holding the FBI accountable. Why is it that important to you to put your name on that lawsuit and make sure that you're counted as one of the team members doing that?
Okay. I need to know the truth of what happened to my son. I think it's so important that, and also, after looking at the evidence, especially in this lawsuit, about how the evidence about the explosives used, the nano, thermite, and thermate, or whatever it is, and the fact that 100 firefighters reported that they heard explosions, which had nothing to do with the plane impact. How could they ignore 100 firefighters who are involved in this all the time? It's like it's a joke against my son, and I really am angry about doing that, and especially to the other people that passed. I mean, almost 3,000 people died. Doesn't that count for something? Don't you want to find who's responsible? Don't you want to investigate the evidence that the architects and engineers give you and ask you to check out? The things about the seismographic evidence about how a specialist, a scientist, a teacher says that jet fuel could not have done what it did. It's ludicrous to me, and I can go on because I look at the evidence with the high fivers and how they have movies of them cheering at 9/11. The fact that they were sent here to take pictures, that means somebody knew about this terrorist attack before it happened and probably placed explosive. How were they able to get explosives into those 3 buildings? And especially 7, which didn't even get hit by a plane. Okay, if we say that it fell because of what? It felt like falling? Come on, it's one thing after another, and it's making a farce of this. It makes me angry. I love my country. I love my country. But I don't love people that would just take the evidence and ignore it, or cover it up, or throw it away, which they did. And in all the counts, if they read the counts, they have to answer it somehow and give peace to people. And who did it? Who are they covering up for? I mean, it's almost like you can't envision that somebody in the FBI or the Justice Department or the newspapers or would just turn their back on this. To me, it's a travesty of justice, and it's not justice. I'll die, and so will most people that lost somebody before this comes to solving it, and that would be a shame. That is a damn shame that the people don't even care. I care. I want to care, and I know other people, if they knew about all of this, maybe there would be a revolution. there should be. The sad thing is that in the FBI, if I read it correctly, which I did, there were FBI agents that didn't want these 5 Israeli, supposedly, people sent back. This is not right. This is evidence, and it's got to be addressed and solved. It has to be rendered.
Right, and you talk about a revolution, and if you listen to this Yale professor that I've listened to the lectures of, revolution doesn't mean wars and violence necessarily. It just means a change in thought provoked by action, and the revolution starts here. It starts with Bob and Barbara and AE911Truth and the Lawyers Committee taking this important action. I found this happens a lot in life, is that there'll be things that will go on. Obviously, I'm not talking about even on the scale of September 11th, just smaller things that happen within an institution. Injustices, bad policies, and people will go along with it. They'll see problems with it until somebody complains, until somebody starts making a big fuss about it. And then all of a sudden, out of the woodwork, everybody who has thought the same thing but not said anything for years will jump on board and back that person up. So it's important to be the first person to speak out, even if you're worried about what people will think of you or what kind of stir you're going to make. If it's the right thing to do, it is definitely the right thing to do.
Just you want the truth. If you don't, why do I love this country if I can't get the truth? Why do some people, I want to know who said to send these people back to Israel or wherever they were sent back to. Who made that decision? That should be coming out, because then maybe that'll lead to who planted the bombs in the building or who's responsible for it.
Yeah, and I'll tell you this, too, and I've made this point on the show many times. At the very least, I think everybody can agree, even people who don't like what we're saying and what we're doing, can agree that 9/11...
Wait a second. Who doesn't like what you're saying? You have a right to an opinion. This was a free country. Or it is a free country. So who doesn't agree with you? Why did Mr. McIlvaine have to argue with people and get into discussions that he's wrong or something? That's ridiculous.
I agree with you, and I'll tell you, we've been at this a long time, and it gets to be almost like a situation where at first when you wake up to this information, you're shocked, you're outraged, and it just seems completely insane that anybody would look away from the facts and not at least join on to the opinion that it should be investigated again, that all the facts should be analyzed considering the importance of this event. And then after a while, you just come to accept that those people are out there, and it's just kind of like barking kennel dogs in the background. You don't pay attention. But at the very least, everybody can agree that government did not protect its people that day. And that's the basic job of the federal government, is to protect the people on their homeland. The people, like yourselves, have the right to have all of their questions answered, to have all of the evidence looked at. Even if it takes the next 100 years of analyzing this event, every question that gets raised should be looked at. And then again, this is one of the most important events in our nation's history. It will be analyzed, it should be analyzed, and sometimes new information comes out. That happens even in murder cases that aren't September 11th, even if it's a shooting down the street at your neighbor's house. Sometimes those crimes don't get solved for 30 years, and it takes a family member who has a suspicion about a particular person being involved, and for new police to come into power, new detectives, to look at different angles and finally make an arrest. So this is actually very normal. The motivations are justified and understood, and why wouldn't you look into a crime scene? Why wouldn't you do your due diligence and explore? Maybe there's a piece of evidence that came out 6 years later that they didn't know. And there's no problem with going back and revising the report.
You're saying that, but I want to know, you're absolutely right. But who is getting paid off? It's a payoff, either advancement of some sort, or financial, or threats. Threats made? Are we being threatened by a country? that they'll blow us up if we let them know. I mean, these are things you think about. I think about.
Can I just jump in a second?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I just reading this morning. I don't know if it was on the internet or no, it wasn't in the paper. But John F. Kennedy Jr., right? Now, we're talking how many years? Back to 1963 when Kennedy, or 68 when Robert was assassinated. He visits Sirhan in prison. Now, he's serving a life sentence for the murder of Robert Kennedy. And he knows that he didn't do it, right? Now, that's what, I don't know, I can't add up the years, but that's a long time ago, right? And, you know, back in those days, and, you know, and you say, who's doing this? Who covers up? Well, you know, you go to the CIA. You know, they've been known to cover up. They're involved in so many things that are around the rest of the world. But the fact is, our news system has been hijacked, and it goes back to Kennedy. You know, Eisenhower said, beware of the military-industrial complex. And Kennedy, Jack Kennedy in 1963 said he was going to break the CIA into 1,000 pieces. So this has been happening, and I think the biggest problem, the biggest blame should go to the press, because something like what we did last week, that should be all over the place. And we're not pointing fingers, but demanding that the FBI and the Department of Justice releases information, but they're not going to do it. But not one press release on the whole thing. I forget the newspaper. Was it? I forget what it was. And they were taken off the internet immediately. The website was taken off. One day it was presented. It gave a fair analysis of what happened down in Washington. So to answer Barbara, the reason these things are happening because the press will not cover anything. So TV won't cover it. The press won't cover it. And this has been happening forever. You know, the Cold War, we don't know why we were in the Cold War, you know, because the press has been, back in the 60s and 70s. And Kennedy was the first one to say it. I'm going to cut the CIA into 1,000 pieces. Well, you can make your own conjectures here. What happened to Kennedy? You know, and you can go on again to Sirhan. And Robert Kennedy actually visits him because he knows he wasn't guilty. But do we hear from Robert Kennedy? Because no one will cover it. You know, I'm sure he has a lot of ideas of what happened. You know, so this has been happening forever. We don't get coverage of it. So I look at it this way. It's like people can't think that their government could be an evil entity. It's like thinking your mother and father are evil. That's impossible. And that's, I think, what happens. People they don't have the time. If you're working as a teacher, you're working in an office, you can't be saying, well, look, I think the government might be involved in this because they're covering up. To me, the cover-up is just as bad as the murder. So, but this has been happening forever. And I think the populace is just so used to it, and they think they're getting proper information from the New York Times. My wife was with a woman that works for the New York Times, and she said to my wife, she said, does he really believe what he's saying? Well, here's the New York Times. Well, everybody takes their initiative writing things from the New York Times. Well, if the New York Times doesn't report on these things, then it didn't happen. And that's our biggest problem in this country. The press has been controlled for so many years and years, and TV also. So that's...
We have the Internet. Thank goodness for that.
Yeah.
But to what end does everybody want? What do they want out of this? I mean, why would you hit the World Trade Center? Like, was that maybe this is just came to me. Maybe that wasn't it at all. Maybe they were actually after the Pentagon. I don't know. I can't understand the reason for it. I can't. And that's why I need an answer to this, because maybe if we get an answer from this, we'll go a little further and find the truth. And then I will know what happened to my son.
Personally, Barbara, I just feel this is what happened right after it. Look at the world now because of 9/11, and this is certainly one of the reasons. I think it's like the empire. It's like the Roman Empire. It's like the British empires. Empires do these things. You have to look at it historically. That's how I do it. That's why I feel comfortable with what I'm doing anymore, because the lives that have been lost since 9/11. Sometimes I feel guilty. I lost my son, but then look at the millions upon millions of people that have died because of 9/11. Obama, he mentioned 9/11 like 1,200 times in different speeches. Like we have justifications to go to other countries and kill people. We kill innocent civilians. Well, this is what empires do. They want to control the world, and that's, I think, the reason is. There's no question about that as far as I'm concerned. We are in trouble.
And speaking of the press, I mean, I've made this observation before that I used to love getting magazines. I used to like buying magazines, various kinds, and I pick up a magazine now and you read the articles, and especially when they talk about this issue. What gets me is obviously the attacks and how wrong the reporters are, but also how uniform they are, how they say the same things. And it reminds me of 8th grade where the teacher would give you an assignment to write an essay and say, make sure you put these points in your essay. Write it how you want in your own voice, but make sure you stick these points in, and that's how they grade it, is that you made sure that you stuck these points in about whatever it was, some historical event. And I feel that the reporters do the same thing. I feel that they get an assignment, make sure that you say bizarre, make sure that you reinforce the official story for a paragraph and state it as absolute, unquestioned fact. And what we have now are not journalists who are seeking the truth. What we have are yes men who are repeating what they are told to repeat, and that is about it. Now, if there's an agenda that a particular newspaper has or a particular TV program related to the politics, the divisive politics, they will go off in that direction and maybe do some digging in an attempt to spite the other side. But when it comes to issues that actually matter and things like this that are difficult issues, hard questions to ask, not just of government officials but ourselves. I mean, how did we let this go on? How did we let this wool get pulled over our eyes for so long? You will not get hardly any of that. And that Courthouse News article is a perfect example. And I don't even know if I'll have time to talk about that at the beginning of this show, but we put out a bulletin about it, but a very fair and balanced just telling of the general public that the lawsuit was filed, and in no time they pull it down. And I still don't have the full story of what happened behind the scenes. The good thing when they do that stuff, though, I try to be a glasses half full kind of guy, is it shows the desperation, it shows the fear that is on the other side, and how I think we are actually moving into their side of the field now. We're starting to take territory in this fight. And so you got to look at it optimistically. I'm just curious about both of you. I don't know this yet. I know for myself, I was kind of blissfully just assumed everybody in government tried to do the best job that they could. There was a little bit of corruption, people helping friends, but did your views of government and of these agencies change from the behavior after September 11th, or had you always suspected that this was the way things are? Barbara, we'll start with you.
Okay, the only thing is, I always believed what they said. Honestly, all these institutions, I had dealings with the Department of Justice, not the FBI, because of the trials in Guantanamo and things like that. Okay, first I'll take that and make a comment. The judge that was doing the trials in Guantanamo got so old waiting for this all to be over, he retired. This is what I think. Secondly, the FBI, I thought that's the Federal Bureau of Investigation is going to do a great job of finding the truth. The same thing with the high fivers, those 5 people that were caught and captured and arrested, were taken by the FBI. Not all of the agents wanted them to be returned. The trouble is, I'm counting on those agents that didn't want them to be returned to be the force that I believe in, not the ones that did it. But I don't know what I feel about this country unless this suit turns out that it will be a big turnaround and it will give answers to all of the families that are struggling, that believe in the architects and engineers, that they'll find the right answer.
Yeah, because a lot of us, like I said, just assumed, when I first heard that, the very beginning of it, because AE doesn't get into blaming anyone, so at the very beginning of this, it would be people saying, oh, Bush did it. And my first thought would be, why would he do that? This made him look bad. Now, as time has gone on, I understand people better. I understand institutions better. I don't think that our establishments, our educational system, and that our TV media system really gives people good upbringing and understanding of how the real world actually works. Just propaganda. I mean, everything is so fake on there. Even the stuff they say is reality is just fake. So, it was a big eye-opening experience for me. Bob, were you aware before you had to deal with this and on such a personal level?
I've always been aware. I was a history teacher. And, of course, being a history teacher, in the last few years, I realized what a lousy history teacher I was because that's all I do, Andy, Barbara. I read history. I try to I go back to the War of 1812. World War I is a disgrace how many people died for what. We say we're always fighting for democracy. Everything, all wars are propaganda. And go to the banks, but the banks always make big time money. I think we've been controlled forever by the media. Specifically, it really got bad in World War I. Make the world safe for democracy, and the false flag of Lusitania, going back to Remember the Maine back in 1900. They were all lies. Lusitania back in, when it was sunk by the Germans, well, they knew that they were going to be sunk by the Germans. They didn't care. They sacrificed American lives so they could get into World War I. The Brits wanted, and it was always about Russia. Russia has so many natural resources. So you have to look at the banks. You have to look at so many things. You go back into 1953. Why, we went into Iran. Why? Because they wanted to control their own oil. You imagine a country wanted to control their own oil. That's a disgrace. Same thing's happening now. Venezuela, the highest oil reserves in the world. Well, Chavez wanted everybody to share in those revenues. Well, that's a horrible thing when you talk about freedom and democracy. You can't do that. A country can't decide what to do with their own oil. Well, that happened in Iran. Look at Iran since. So this has been happening all throughout the world. And this is what, again, I hate to say it, is empires. This is what they do. You look at the history of the empire, it's mind-boggling how many millions upon millions upon millions of people have died. For what? For the wealth of the world. I've read a lot about the Congo. 20 million people from 1900 till now have died in the Congo because the natural resources they had are mind-boggling. So we help bring in dictators so that these poor people can't, capitalism can come into the Congo and we can extract all these things, all our rubber for our cars. Well, they don't care about that. So this is all related. And so 3,000 people dying is no big deal for a lot of people. Because since then it's been the catalyst for doing what we're doing in the Middle East. So the more I read history, the more I realize that this has been happening forever. Going back to the Roman Empire. It's just that people get control, they have power, and they're going to do what they feel is right. And that's what we're doing right now. And, of course, Venezuela is a perfect example of that. They just want the oil wealth. And to me, Barbara, you're talking about revolution. What's a revolution? I feel very optimistic about that. All these women coming into Congress. We have a Muslim woman in there. We're probably not going to be sued, but a revolution will take place because I think this empire is dying out. These women, you have women in there who are going to challenge the white supremacy of these congressmen they've had for so many years, and it's going back forever. That the world has to change, and I think that revolution is coming about because the rest of the world knows what's happening. So, I'm optimistic. I'll never see it, but I think the revolution is happening. It's not violent. You have these women that are saying, "Hey, let's change things around here." Well, each election, maybe people are going to realize this crap of going to war is stupid. We're always in war. Because who makes money out of war? All the banks. A lot of people, make a lot of money. So. That's my feeling about the whole thing.
I think it's interesting. Maybe all of the congressmen have to send in their firstborn if there's a war, and I bet we wouldn't have too many wars.
Well, you're right. Of course. But rich people aren't going to send their kids to war.
When I think of the Holocaust and what happened there and how many didn't anybody know about these concentration camps? I mean, I'm young enough not to know all this, but what I listen to and read and hear about the Holocaust, how could people not realize what was happening there? Why are we just sitting back and allowing the same thing to happen in this country? I mean, really, this is power. Power by who? The military? The congressmen? Businessmen? The mob? Who's at fault here at doing this kind of new takeover?
Well, Barbara, who makes money with all wars?
Well,
I mean, it was back in the 18th, like
ammunition companies,
banks, money. Everybody suffers, but they're still making money. Back in the war in 1812, I think one of the Rothschilds said, "This is great. I support Wellington and I support who's Wellington and Napoleon." And so, and of course these countries pay them, they make loads and loads of money. Well, that's just, the banks made money in World War I, World War II. Their banks are always making money because where do we get our money? Well, the Federal Reserve prints the money. So a lot of people, so it's just not banks, but then there's a lot of businesses involved in all this. That's where the revolution is. We got to start changing our thinking that, we don't need wars. We've been at wars. The greatest book ever written was in 1933 by Butler. He said, war is a racket. And he was one of the highest decorated Marines ever. And he says, this is ridiculous. And they had those revolutions in the early 30s, in Washington. Hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people. That's the way everybody's just going to have to camp out and say, hey, this system stinks. Let's change the system. It's not about our capitalism or socialism, but these wars are ridiculous. Let's get back to how do we discover peace in the world? And I really believe that's going to happen. I really do.
I agree. And I'll tell you what, as somebody who was brought up in the 90s generally, so I remember how history was always portrayed, and it was like, okay, World War I happened because a guy got shot somewhere in Eastern Europe, and then World War II happened, and you never heard about Smedley Butler, you never heard about the Bonus March or anything like that. And I also think, too, is like, we look at what happened in Germany. So the American public says, okay, that happened there, so if we ever have people in funny uniforms and have the exact same thing happening here, we'll keep an eye out for that. But we don't understand is that we get the same things, but they come in different forms. It's always something slightly different, even though it's the same. So people let their guard down. They also think, that couldn't happen here because there's this illusion of all this choice and democracy.
And it is happening here, isn't it?
Well, it's happening. I mean, just focusing in on September 11th, just the fact that you can have Building 7 fall the way it did. Everybody that I showed the building to, because I'll show it to them, and I won't even tell them it has anything to do with September 11th, and I'll just show it to them, and they'll say, there obviously was bombs in the building, explosive devices brought the building down, and that's how I lead it into, this was the third tower that actually fell on September 11th, and I go into the whole discussion of that. But people instinctively know it's a controlled demolition. People who should even know better, people who are professionals, but then when you tell them about the association with 9/11 and what the government says happened to this building and how impossible it is, a lot of people will clam up. They're afraid. They're afraid of either the social implications of it, or maybe even just the personal financial implications. Maybe they are involved with a company that has a contract with the government, and they want to lose that. This is how these things happen, and it's not a shadowy conspiracy either. It's just sociology taking place here right in front of you, is that people just, they just have natural reactions to mass peer pressure, and only few individuals will speak up. What the good news is that those few individuals can change everything, because all it takes is a very motivated small group to take on the other motivated small group that's doing the bad thing and win, and then everybody else just kind of goes along. And then everybody's saying, I thought it was a controlled demolition from the start. Oh, yes. So that's what gives me hope. And I want to know, Barbara, have you talked to other family members or just other people that you're close to about your doubts of the official story? And if so, what have been some of the reactions?
Actually, I'm in Florida, so I don't have access to that many people. I've probably stopped going up to New York because of the mess that they did with the remains, putting them in fresh kills. That was a suit I was involved in with ended nowhere again. And my son worked at Fetchkill for a while, and he hated it. And yet all the remains, or I'm sure some of the remains of people, were put there. So I have a vendetta against New York for doing that. But that's not the answer to your question. I just don't talk to too many people because I find it gets nowhere. This, and I hope and pray that this suit is the one that's going to wake people up, because the Guantanamo to me is a farce now after so many years. How long does it take to find out if these people are guilty or not? If they're not, getting rid of them. Why are we supporting that whole nonsense? It's too much collusion going on with government agencies, either with each other or... And I talk to people. The people I do talk to is another mother that lost his son, and that's about it. There's nobody down here that wants to talk about 9/11 anymore. Like, you're right. It's like history. We'll just put it in the book or something. I don't know. I talk to my family about it, but sometimes I think they're tired of listening to me.
Yeah.
That's about it. I don't have contact with that many people because of the location that I'm in.
Well, I'll tell you what, you say people don't want to talk about it anymore, but because of you guys joining in on this lawsuit, we know at least a few people are going to be talking about it. In court, there'll be judges and lawyers talking about it, and about the FBI completely dropping the ball, completely ignoring important evidence, and I'm hoping that justice will prevail and that there will be a amended report that we can use to go ahead and bring to Congress. I'm talking about an amended report from the FBI to bring to Congress and get that bill passed that is in Bobby's name, and finally have an acknowledgement of what really happened on that day. And unfortunately, even though this is a fascinating discussion, we are out of time here on this show. So Barbara, Bob, keep on doing what you're doing, and thank you so much for coming on 9/11 Freefall today.
All right, thank you, Barbara. Nice talking to you. Good luck, okay?
You too. God bless.
This program is on every Thursday night on No Lies Radio at 10 o'clock Eastern, 7 o'clock Pacific. You can also keep track of the archives by going to 911freefall.com. This is Andy Steele saying have a great week and good luck.